Yo guys, what is going on? CJ2K here to talk about some advanced baseball analytics. The three we're going to talk about today are WAR, FIP, and ERA+, and then I'm going to finish off with why Ronald Acuna Jr. should win the NL MVP over Mookie Betts, even though Mookie Betts technically has a higher WAR. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. All right, y'all, so we're going to start off breaking down WAR. That's going to be our first advanced metric that we look at for this video. So, the first thing you need to know about WAR is that it stands for wins above replacement. All right, now what is replacement? What does replacement mean? Who is that referring to? So, replacement is a readily available player at that position. So, for example, if you take a left fielder, their wins above replacement is going to be based upon the average metric of the replacement player at that position. So that'd be a replacement left fielder that you could get from free agency or from AAA. Now, the main thing to note is that WAR is per position. So if a left fielder and a second baseman have the exact same statistical output, that's offense, base running, defense, they're going to have different wins above replacement because the baseline for each of those positions is different. The other thing to look at is that there's two ways to calculate WAR. Well, there's two main ways. There's a bunch of different ways, but the two main ways are F-WAR and B-WAR. Those are the two most common metrics used when associated with WAR. One of them uses fielding independent pitching, or FIP, and the other one uses runs allowed per 9 innings, which is a metric similar to ERA. Now, the main thing to look at is if you look over here and you see player A has a WAR of 7 and player B has a WAR of 7.5. By WAR standards, according to the MLB, these two players are actually going to be indistinguishable. WAR should only be used when you're looking at players that have massive differences in WAR, like a player with a WAR of 8 compared to a player with a WAR of 3. So up next, we're going to break down FIP. Now, FIP stands for Fielding Independent Pitching. And I'll be honest, when I first started looking into this metric, I wasn't even sure what a good FIP was supposed to be. So a good FIP is defined as any FIP between 3 and 4, with a FIP above 4 being below average and a FIP below 3 being excellent. So the lower the FIP, the better. Now, what exactly does FIP measure? You should see an equation on your screen right now, but essentially what FIP does is it takes balls hit into the field of play out of the equation for a pitcher. FIP only evaluates strikeouts, walks, hit by pitches, and home runs. Looking at runs allowed per 9 innings and then ERA+. The reason we're going to look at runs allowed per 9 innings is because it was mentioned earlier in one of our WAR metrics. This is a really simple one. This is really just ERA without the E. So what that means essentially is it's just looking at how many runs the pitcher has given up over the span of 9 innings. The way that differs from ERA is that with ERA, if a player gets on via an error or scores via an error, that does not affect their ERA, but it will affect their runs allowed per 9 innings. Runs allowed per 9 innings does not care about the earned part of earned run average. It's just how many runs you give up over 9 innings. Pretty simple. All right, so shifting into ERA+, this is going to be our final metric we talk about today, and this is probably one of the most important stats that we look at. It's one of the more hot button topics for pitchers nowadays. So what this is essentially is it is a normalized ERA based off of a ballpark factor. So what it says is certain pitchers have more of an advantage because they pitch in more pitcher-friendly ballparks than other pitchers. But what ERA+ attempts to do is it attempts to act like every single pitcher is pitching on the same field in the same stadium every single night. And what it does is it normalizes every pitcher's ERA across the entire league to where 100 is a league average. So if you see somebody has an ERA+ of 150, it means they have an ERA 50% better than the league average, as if they were all pitching in the same ballpark. Pretty simple. Lastly, why do I think Ronald Acuna Jr. should win the MVP over Mookie Betts? Well, it's pretty simple. Like we said earlier when we were talking about WAR, you can only really use WAR to distinguish players that have massively different WARs, like a player with a WAR of 8 versus a WAR of 3. Ronald Acuna Jr. and Mookie Betts have WARs within tenths of a point of one another based off of which standard for WAR you use. Therefore, you have to go to other statistics to figure out which player is the better player or which player meant more. Pretty simply, Ronald Acuna is the only player in the history of the MLB to hit 40 home runs and steal 70 bases. The answer to me seems pretty clear. Even with Mookie playing multiple different positions, Ronald Acuna Jr. did something that may never be done in the sport again. Therefore, he deserves an MVP. Thanks for tuning in, y'all.